What's going on, everybody? Feder here from 3D Print SOS. Welcome back to the channel. In my last video, we took my original Aquila and we extended it, giving it almost 4 times the amount of real estate that it had before. So with all of that added weight and the extension itself, there were some internet scientists that came into the comments section and a bunch of social media saying that with all that added weight, the printer was no longer going to be adequate and you should just spend the extra money to buy something that's already big. But I do like the way that you can improve on this machine in increments. But before we spend any more money, what I did was I gathered a bunch of different filament from different companies. We got Duramic 3D, IIIDMax, Jarees, we got PETG, Silks, PLAs, PLA pluses, lots of different types of filaments. And to test the machine, I went ahead and printed some things small and I printed some things huge. So let's go ahead and check that out. Alright, so let's talk about the filaments. So I printed a whole bunch of Benchies. If you watch my channel or follow me on Instagram, you guys know I'm a big fan of Benchies. I have a ton of them. I use them not only as like a color palette thing to choose the right filament, but I also test my machines with them to make sure my profile settings are right before I share them with you, things of that nature. So all of these rolls were sent to me for free by 3 different companies. I'm not affiliated with them in any way. They just sent these to me to check out and for me to give my opinions, and I figured this would be the perfect opportunity to test the machine against these filaments. And so far we have PETG, PLA plus, regular PLA, and silk PLA. So a whole variety of common filaments and common materials that are used. And this one right here by Jarees, this matte PETG, is definitely the one that intrigued me the most. Here is the Benchy that came right off the printer. All these Benchies, I haven't modified them in any way. This is how they came out. And for PETG, I haven't had a non-stringy PETG experience on the Aquila yet. So having this filament come out like this is really not only refreshing, but it's exciting because this is definitely unique in that, and also the fact that it looks like carbon fiber nylon. It has this nice silky kind of matte look to it. It feels almost like a denim or something along those lines. Almost feels like a paper. And it's definitely a bit light, which is nice. And for applications that need something like this, PETG is typically really shiny, and having this being matte and not reflective definitely can find some use for this specific filament. And I'll have links for all these down below. Both the Duramic sets and the Jarees can be found on Amazon. However, 3DMax has their own website, and their niche is that they sell these in bulk for extremely low prices. So I went ahead and looked, and if you buy 8, you get a massive discount. But if you buy 10 rolls, which I know is a lot of filament to purchase in one sitting, you can get each one for $7.99. It might be $8.99, but even at $8.99, that's a ridiculous price. It's so inexpensive, and it's PLA plus. And you know, for someone who spends about $22 to $25 per roll on Yusu filament, for example, the most premium filament that I like personally, rolls for this amount of money is just very interesting. So as soon as that was said to me, I'm like, yep, send them over. I'll definitely check that out. I printed with a half a spool with this filament, 0 issues. I printed with all these down here, printed with a light blue a ton. No issues so far. The only thing I can say about it is I did notice that occasionally, I don't know if you could see that, there's some speckles of a different color inside of the rolls, and mostly on this orange one. I haven't really seen that on the rest, honestly, but I haven't run into any problems. So at such a low cost, you know, I'm not expecting this to be a premium filament, but for an everyday filament or for something that you're gonna you know, finish later or sand or paint, this seems awesome. They also have a huge selection of colors, which was surprising when I went on their site. Honestly, it was almost refreshing because there's just so many. It's not just red, blue, white, and green. There is a ton of different variations of colors. You know, we got fluo orange, fluo yellow, light blue, fluo green, army green, and a crystal color, which is really interesting. It's really transparent. and it lacks any kind of pigment. Usually when you do like a natural or transparent PLA, it tends to be on the warm side, almost not brownish, but it has a little bit of warm color to it. This does not. It's very see-through. So that's pretty cool. Then over here to Duramic 3D, the two on the bottom there are silk filaments, and I print with silk very often. And this stuff's great. It's really shiny. You know, just like silk, it shows any imperfection that you might have, which makes tuning better actually, because you can identify problems a little bit easier. So that's that. And another really exciting filament for me personally is this matte blue PLA. You know, typically a lot of filaments, even the non-silks, are shiny and have this like kind of wet look to them. Like any of these regular PLA pluses and PLAs here, but that matte color looks really interesting, and I definitely want to print more with that one. So definitely check it out. I think they have a really cool finish on these Duramic 3D filaments. So let's keep going. Let's talk about the prints. Okay, so I wanted to really test not only the filament but obviously the machine. So I went ahead and printed this. It is a Connect 4 set. That I printed for my daughter in 150% of its size. This piece is bigger than the bed on the original Aquila. And if you can see, this was printed standing up on the machine. It's like 19 hours to print. As you can see, it's not perfect. There is some ringing going around all the circles, but if you're looking, this wasn't printed with supports. And the fact that it was able to print this tall with one Z without any kind of issues like this, let me show you the other side as well, is definitely how do you say this, reassurance. It's a reassurance that with a little bit of tuning you can get this thing to print really, really nicely. Here is the bottom. I ended up putting some felt on the bottom just to make it a little bit nicer when you're playing the game. It sits like this. But essentially this was printed in the Duramic silk silver. Look at that shine. And it came out perfect. I have zero complaints about how this piece came out. This took a long time. This was a 19-hour print and the bottom was over 20 hours. I don't exactly remember how much. It is a solid piece. But I wanted them to last, and I liked the larger size of the whole thing. And finally, let's get to the star of the show, right? So this is a normal Benchy, and this is a 416% Benchy. It is absolutely massive. And this was printed over 36 hours on the machine. Nothing special outside of it's printed at a 0.26 layer height, so a little bit taller than normal, just because it would have taken absolute ages. There was no supports, and as you can see, it's not flawless. If you look around everywhere where there's arches, there is a tiny bit of ringing, just like we saw in the smaller prints and all the smaller models. But the things that are a takeaway here is look at how well the cooling did. The cooling fan is stock on the machine, has the stock shroud, and there's no hanging bits anywhere. Everything looks round and square. It's very hard to complain about something like this. Now, there are a tiny bit of surface imperfections, but it's really minimal. And like for example, right here, right below the window, there is one layer where the outside layer must have had a mini clog or something along those lines. It looks like it fixed itself right away. This thing is not weak. That's how I know that it's just on the outside and not on the inside. And it's just extremely impressive to be able to do this with such an inexpensive setup. Now, there are printers out there that are also inexpensive that are similarly sized, but they're not that much better in terms of specs. So if I could get something like this in increments and pay small amounts the entire time instead of a big upfront chunk, I do believe that this is a nice option for you. So you can get yourself an Aquila, you can get yourself a CR Touch, use that setup for a while, get to know it. Then you can make it significantly larger, and if you're finding that it's weak in some areas, you can very easily upgrade it with really inexpensive parts. So I'm definitely going to be looking at various ways to upgrade the machine to make it better. And I think what I'm going to do with this setup is I'm going to continue finding some of the most fun and some of the best modifications that I can get for this Aquila and see how far I can take it. And I'm going to keep another Aquila down here completely stock that I can test against. I can help you guys with your questions. I'm going to keep the stock firmware on it, whereas this one's running Alex's, things of that nature. So I always want to have another machine to fall back on, you know, in case there's something to compare to, something along those lines. Some of the other things that I would like to do to the machine is to make sure everything is square. I'm gonna go ahead and take apart the top panels of top extrusions of the machine. I'm gonna try to make everything as square as I possibly can and then go ahead and retighten it. Something I'm going to use to help with that is I printed a bunch of these 90-degree brackets that I designed. You can find these on my Thingiverse. They use M5 or M4 hardware and some T-nuts. I usually buy these in boxes on Amazon that have various nuts and bolts in them, just because it's much easier to work on printers with a nice set. But I printed, I think, 5 of these, and there's 5 areas where you can install them on that machine to help you get everything nice and square and a little bit more tight. And finally, the one other free thing that I saw that can be done to the machine is I use this PETG to print solid bed mounts. So I use this setup on my custom machine for years now, and what I do is I get some cardboard, the pressed kind, not the kind that's corrugated, used for Amazon boxes, for example, but the kind that's used for like packaging, that's a flat single piece, and I cut out a washer for each one of these, and I put the washer in between this PETG print and the hotbed, and that dissipates a ton of the heat before it goes into the PETG. And I've been printing really hot things on that machine without any problems with it for a long time now. So I'm pretty confident that these solid bed springs or solid bed mounts will definitely work. And with the CR Touch, if these aren't perfectly level in some way, shape, or form, or even the metal isn't perfectly leveled on the mounting itself, because it is a really heavy bed mounted to the stock mounting, the CR Touch is going to be a huge help and help us make sure everything is still printing perfectly fine. So there you go, guys, a bunch of different tests, some impressive stuff, and you know, it definitely gives me some reassurance that this was not a mistake, and that is a really cool, interesting modification that you can do to your Aquila or your Ender 3 and have some confidence in it, even though there's some naysayers. But aside from any of that, you know, have fun with 3D printing. Don't take it too seriously. Unless you do, then that's up to you. And as always, guys, I'll see you guys in the comments. Later.